Hey, welcome. This is The Process. My name is Dr. John Bush. This is lesson 1, 2, 3 for our 2022 season. This is the second lesson on the deep metrics of the tight end position. Please go and listen to the previous one. If you have interest in tight ends, I gave you a little background on why I do these deep metrics. So I suggest you go forth there. I don't want to take up any more folks' time. So we will continue our journey with the deep dive here. Okay, this slide is a continuation of metrics of tight ends, and in this case, my experience, EXP. So it's not age necessarily. We're doing the experience level. Of course, year one would be a rookie. Year two is the next year and so forth. So I did the first 13 seasons, and this is from 2000 to 2021, all tight ends in the league. And I highlighted the peak at 7 years, and you might say, what about 11 and 12? The issue, if you saw in the previous lesson, was the number of tight ends in the league after 11 or 12 years experience is pretty thin. So that tends to skew the data. And so I'm wondering, or prefer to look kind of back 10, 11 back. And the peak is at 7, and we see that the rookie tight ends 26, and that's doubled by 7 years out. So the concept of seasoning tight ends continues, very much unlike some hotshot running backs or quarterbacks. So the tight end is different that way. And the average receptions, since this is PPR data, is not surprising, also at 7 years. So for your dynasty, be aware that there is a decline in the number of tight ends in the leagues, right? The older they get, time does catch up. And but I believe it's a little further out than in running backs. So the idea that running backs are a little more fragile, I think the data would support that. And tight ends can last longer. I agree with that statement as well. Certainly quarterbacks can. So in Dynasty, I think you could still have productive tight ends, 7, 8 years of experience. Starts getting a little thin after 9 years. So if I think this is a little bit more clear for dynasty players. I believe the experience versus the age. This may be the metric to use for your jettison targets there. You want to start considering get rid of tight ends right after their peak 7, 8 years. So coming back 9 and 10, you probably should have already got rid of them. So that's how it looks to me on average. Okay, and the receptions I think are saying, the same concept. This is a graph showing the years of experience here on the x-axis and the average fantasy points and reception. This is scaled here. And we see a seasoning occurring. This is the average fantasy points. This is a trend line. It's a polynomial trend line. Don't worry about polynomials. Just this is probably the better trend line. And if you follow this, looks like most tight ends by year 3 are going to be pretty close to where they're at. So I think for Dynasty, that's probably a critical year coming into their third year. So I would urge you to look at the tight ends that were rookies last year or certainly 2 years ago, and have any disappointed that still seem to have some uh, potential, and maybe they had some injuries or on the wrong team. So I think the third year is the buy year. You want to be in on any forgotten or mispriced tight end by their third year. That's when you want to strike. And at the same time, by the 8th year of experience, there is a decline. And I know the line gets a little skewed, 12, 11, 12. That's because the amount of tight ends hanging around there is pretty rare, really small over 21 years. So I think I would use 8 years, kind of that sweet spot there. So to me, third to 8th year is kind of that buy and hold, and then after, coming out of the 8th year, some people say, I want to get rid of them before they get too stale. Well, then you want to get rid of them in their 8th year. So you got their peak at 7, and you got their coming up at 3 and 4. So, that's maybe how I would do that. And the receptions, I think, are a little bit less apparent than I think the actual fantasy points. There's more clarity there. So that's how I'd use this data to behave in, I think, Dynasty, and that's what I would look at. And again, this is total tight ends. These are including tight ends that maybe didn't score many points at all. But this is just a look-see across all tight ends. To examine now the tight ends by rank sectors, what I call rank sectors. If you think of the tight end pie, you cut it into the top 4 pieces. The top piece are the best ones. That's the 75 to 100th, and that's in yellow. Then the next piece down, 50th to 74th, and then below average, you got 2 pieces here. And I've marked the average fantasy points here in each of these slices. And so we're talking the main tight ends. And I did talk about in the previous lesson the golden age of tight ends from 09 to 14, maybe 15. And look, we've been living in a declining situation since 2017. So if you were thinking, wow, tight ends used to be really good in the old days, 2011, 12, that's what the data is saying too. But the data also is saying the league is using more tight ends, and they're diversifying tight end roles more than ever. So they're splitting the opportunities a little more than I think I would like across the league. It's not necessarily per team. You have to get deeper still. This is the landscape. You drill down or you dig your way up, bottom up, to get, at the team level. Okay. But just overall, we're in some declining points. But from 2008 back, I mean, we're still 2021 was doing really good compared to those years. So, things have definitely looked up for tight ends. I think that means it's more of a passing league, and I think tight ends and wide receivers probably have prospered under a passing scenario. Pass catching running backs certainly have prospered. We talked about in that lesson as well. So there's nothing here that suggests that we would move up into a dramatic golden age part 2 of tight ends at this point. And I think that holds true for, it's probably not as good on your tight end 3 and 4s that, in deep leagues, you might, the 50th to the 74th percentile. Looks like the golden age wasn't so golden for some of those, but it did peak at 2000. and 13. And last year was 40 points, so that's one of the worst we've seen since 2008 there. So if we focus the rank sector on those two pieces, above average pieces, and the best are 75, there's the points. And if you look across 21 years and you assign the peak at 100%, how does each year production associate with that peak? So I did that in percentage. So the way to interpret this data is that in 2011, we had a peak of fantasy points for tight ends, the best tight ends. 2012 was at 97, so only 3 percentage points off. 13, 3 percentage points. We dropped 7 at 2014, 8% 2015, 12%, 17, 18%, and we've kind of come back up to 14%. But we have not seen the 90s in since 2016. So we have definitely declined in the best tight ends, and I believe we're getting more tight ends and the opportunities are spreading more. So that probably means on average tight ends are worth less than they used to be overall. But that can be tricky because certain teams, that rule does not hold. This is just league rules. So that's just where you start. With all things equal, that's how you would assume here. In the next piece as well, the next piece, the peak was again 2013. And last year, we were in the 22% off, 78th percentile. So COVID may have really knocked back those guys, but 2020, we didn't see that. So probably nothing really to take, a big take home from that. There's nothing to predict that, we're going to get some advantage digging into those tight ends, versus the better tight ends. So nothing here changes how I will approach the draft here, just for me to understand that there is more tight ends and there's probably more diversification. I think in daily fantasy sports, then, some of these surprise tight ends that can win you, the rarity, if the conditions are favorable, for, scoring a couple of touchdowns, then you're going to make some big money on that position. So do be aware. And again, I haven't looked at it from a betting point of view. I would really like to see the ROIs and, some of these extreme situations. If I was doing betting, I would have to dig much deeper here. But I don't bet on props and whatnot, at least not now. Okay, so if I do ever get to that data and dig around, I will definitely put some lessons out for it. Okay, so if we look at this data by trend lines, if you look at the green trend line, that's the 50th to 74. So the red is the top tight ends, and if you look at that, we have declined since 2015. And I think that, if you look, that's been the case for the other sliver as well. So probably nothing to take away other than my story about the number of tight ends and the diversification. And I don't think that diversification was in the early 2000s. So I think things have definitely changed the league in a lot of ways here. And I think that's what that might be telling us there a little bit. Okay, so I think that's my takeaway. I do note that the best tight ends even in 2021, we're still better than some of the better tight ends in the early 2000s. So that is of some interest. But like I said, nothing here is going to, I mean, you think, well, is it moving up? Well, remember the stats, you stay within your data. If you start extrapolating in the future, things get really wacky quick. And if you've ever taken stats, you know that is a no-no. You cannot go beyond you can guess, okay, you can roll the dice, but there's nothing here that, you know, I mean, the way the trend line's drawn, see, it's pointing up, but if you look, here's that, and that. It looks like almost a straight line in 2019, 20, and 21. So sometimes trend lines, if you try to Ouija out, Ouija, I don't know if that's a real word, Ouija board. So to me, divine or guess, predict the future, there's nothing in this trend line that would say it's going to go up in 2022. Okay, so that was a short lesson here, but that's fine. People's attention spans are sad and weak these days. Flabby be what I would tell my students. Okay, your attention span is flabby. Okay, Dr. Bush, thank you for that. You're welcome. So this is Dr. Bush for the process. Second lesson of tight end. Got one more coming. So go and listen to that as well. We'll be done. And moving on to wide receivers down the road. Woo woo. Extra fun here today.